Thank you, Madam President. I come to the floor to thank my colleagues for working so hard on this very important legislation we are going to pass tonight to deal with the opioid crisis. From Port Angeles to Spokane, I guarantee you I've heard about this problem, seen how our communities are struggling, and this is the very help that they've been asking for. They want new tools, they want better solutions, and they want us to join the fight against drug manufacturers who push this out to communities when they should be following a process and reporting so that our law enforcement can cut down on the huge amounts of opioids streaming into our community. This legislation does many things, and I'm glad that it does. It stops or basically with the STOP Act, it will help crack down on shipments of fentanyl into the United States from mail, something we really, very important that we do, and I thank my colleague for Ohio on that. Authorizes funding for a new grant program to help train law enforcement and protect them against the deadly opioids like fentanyl, because their exposure to it has been so unbelievable, and it is a risk to them every day they're out there doing their job. It reauthorizes the drug courts, which many people in the state of Washington have told me has been beneficial to how they deal with this crisis as it relates to the individuals in their states, helping nonviolent offenders recover and help them move forward. It reauthorizes the high-intensity drug trafficking area program, which uses federal resources to help local law enforcement crack down on illicit drug rings. We need to help our law enforcement who are dealing with this problem every single day have the tools to do this job. And the fact that it reauthorizes this program on the high-intensity drug trafficking areas is just the kind of tool that they need. It also makes permanent the ability for doctors to treat up to 275,000 patients with the kind of treatment that is necessary for them, which also helps us get to people faster and get them into a recovery situation faster. But, Madam Chair, the one thing that I really want to draw attention to is that this issue of hearing over and over again about how opioid manufacturers have flooded our communities with a product when in reality current law had said they are supposed to monitor and track the distribution of this drug. Well, in too many cases, those safeguards were not followed. And throughout their process, they weren't reporting on suspicious orders of opioids, preventing them from ending up in the wrong hand, or in some instances, the fact that they ended up in the hands of a black market who then continued to flood communities with the product. In one example, a physician in Everett, Washington, wrote more than 10,000 prescriptions of opioids. This number of prescriptions was 26 times higher than the average prescriber in Everett, Washington. So he wrote 26 times more opioid prescriptions than the average prescriber, and however, the drug manufacturer failed to report this suspicious activity. When we authorized this drug, we said this is what has to happen because of its highly addictive nature. It has to be tracked. Law enforcement has to keep and be advised of anything that looks like suspicious activity. This abnormal high number was a clear red flag that should have been reported. Instead, the opioid manufacturer turned a blind eye to the negligent distribution. In response to those, people in my state and many other states have been critical and have filed lawsuits because they have been so concerned about this issue. What is clear, though, is that we need to do something now to make sure that opioid manufacturers follow the law that's already on the books about reporting of suspicious distribution or volumes of distribution that are suspicious. Well, today, this legislation takes a major step forward on that by including penalties for negligent opioid distribution strong enough to serve as a deterrent to those manufacturers with the action that we've seen in the past. The Bipartisan Opioid Crisis Response Act includes provisions from legislation that myself and Senator Harris from California authored. Our provisions increase the civil and criminal penalties on companies that fail to take responsible measures to prevent their drugs from entering the black market. Our legislation increases the civil penalties by 10 times, from $10,000 to $100,000 per violation. So that adds up very quickly to what we think has been transactions that have been very suspicious. In addition, the bill increases the maximum criminal penalty to $500,000 for companies that willfully disregard or knowingly fail to keep proper reporting on these distribution activities. Again, this is what we put into the law because of the highly addictive nature of these drugs. We said that they have to be monitored, their distribution has to be monitored, but because prior to today, the slap on the wrist was not enough a deterrent, most of those requirements were ignored. Today, we're putting a much more stringent requirement in, and to say that they will get serious fines if they don't follow the law. This is such an important issue that a bipartisan group of 39 U.S. Attorney Generals sent a letter to the Senate Judiciary Committee in support of these efforts. Our own Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, helped in getting that, and I want to thank him. The Attorney Generals wrote, quote, "Diversion of prescription opioids has devastated communities in our states. The consequences of turning a blind eye to suspicious opioid orders cannot merely be a cost of doing business. We urge you to support the CARES Act to ensure that the penalties effectively hold manufacturers accountable and help stem diversion," end quote. So I agree with those attorney generals, and I'm so glad this part is in this legislation. Creating a more serious attitude towards the illegal distribution of this product falling into the hands of black markets is so serious. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. I thank the President. I yield the floor.